This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. It's tax season, and we're all a bit tired of numbers. But here's one you need to hear. $16.5 billion. That's how much the IRS flagged for possible identity fraud last year. Now here's a good number. 100 million. That's how many data points LifeLock monitors every second. If your identity is stolen, they'll fix it. Guaranteed. Save up to 40% your first year at LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
Hello, this is Simon Brew. I'm the editor of Film Stories magazine, and a very warm welcome to a special episode of the Film Stories podcast.
Come with me.
And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
In movies that had stories.
That the story just sucks them in.
This is just the beginning.
Stories. We would be honored if you would join us.
Hello, and a very warm welcome to Film Stories with Simon Brew. I am Simon Brew. That's absolutely everything you need to know about me. The aim of this podcast, if you're new to it, well, welcome if you're not new to it as well, is to talk, as the story suggests, of the stories of film. So I tend to talk about production stories, behind the scenes stories, development stories, release stories, marketing stories, really anything that goes to contribute to make films that we know and sometimes love, just that, the films that we know and sometimes love. Now, this is one of my occasional special episodes of the Film Stories podcast where I get to talk to a filmmaker about their movie and the story behind their movie and how it came to be. I'm delighted to say that in this episode I'm joined by Bill Condon, who most recently and primarily what we talk about has made 2019's The Good Liar. Previously he's made the likes of Gods and Monsters, he's made the recent Disney Beauty and the Beast, made Mr. Holmes, he did the latter Twilight films, and as I'm going to touch on, he also wrote FX2, a 90s sequel I'm really quite fond of. Just to set the scene for The Good Liar, this one is directed by Condon. It stars in its lead roles Dame Helen Mirren and Sir Ian McKellen, with support from Jim Carter and Russell Tovey. The screenplay for it's been written by Jeffrey Hatcher, working from the novel by Nicholas Searle. And what I particularly like about the film is just how out of place it seems to feel in modern day cinema, that here's a big thriller, really, with two stars in there over the age of 70 who aren't dying, they're not going through horrible illnesses or something like that. It's just two really playful stars having a really playful time in a really good, engrossing thriller. It's a spoiler light conversation. The only bits we touch on in this are things that have been talked about and given away in the promotion for the film. If you want to go in completely cold on it, then I fully understand if you want to give this podcast a miss. There's nothing talked about that director Bill Condon isn't happy being talked about. This was all established before the conversation. Anyway, enough waffle from me. Well, there's some more to come, obviously, but I'm going to play you a clip from the film and then we'll go straight into my chat with Bill Condon after this.
So tell me, have you done this a lot? Met people on the computer service? Don't you find it's always the same?
You mean the anticipation followed by the letdown? But I tell myself, brace up. This time it will be different. Which is why I must now confess to you a deception on my part. My name is in fact not Brian, it's Roy.
To the future.
So that was a clip from The Good Liar, and I'm delighted to be joined by its director, Bill Condon. Hello.
Hi there, good to see you.
1995's The American President, directed by Rob Reiner.
Yes.
There's a beautifully cutting line in it by, I think it's delivered by David Paymer,
right,
where he just...
And written by who? American President
it's
Aaron
Sorkin.
Sorkin,
Yeah, it's a really
right?
good film. Led to the West. Whole other segue.
Yes, of
I've
course.
gone off already.
Right.
But he just, I think it's something along the lines of, it's Christmas, and David Paymer turns around and says, what? Yeah, sure it is. You didn't get the memo. And I just love that memo. That line just sums up the film business. I can't help but conclude, this is one of my worst ever segues, that you just don't get the memo. So there's a film with two leads who are over 70. It's not about them retiring or slowly becoming
being
ill.
sick, right?
Yeah, they're not. It's from a major studio. It's going for a mainstream audience. They're not going to the other side of the world to set up a hotel or anything like that.
Right.
How?
and it's not an awards-chasing movie.
No.
It's a commercial
It's a big
movie.
plot, yeah.
Right, exactly. No, it is. I still cannot believe somehow this happened, and I also feel like we got in just under the wire,
Yeah.
But I have to say the how really is, this will sound, in some way, I hope not phony, but it's true. The folks at New Line and Toby Emmerich at Warner Brothers, I think they had this conscious idea that they wanted to swim against the tide, and that they wanted to sort of create a slate that was more in line with the kinds of movies that were being made when they first got into the movie business. Before they sort of moved up and gained control. So if you look it's an incredibly eclectic slate for them that includes things like Joker, but also Motherless Brooklyn, and smaller movies like this, adult movies. Again, treating them in a commercial way. It's scary because it's not, it's not certain that it's working. So it is like, okay, you hold on to this idea, you go for it, you present it, and maybe the audience isn't there anymore. That is the worry, and we're about to find out on this movie. We're only a week away here in the UK and 2 weeks in America, and I've got my fingers crossed. But you're right about my favorite thing when I read this novel is that any hint of mortality in these two characters, one of them is 80, one of them is 78. Is part of a scam that they're putting on. Yeah. When cornered, they start to ache and moan and pretend that they've got some kind of life-threatening disease, but none of it's true. They're completely in the swim of things, full of life and pursuing these very devious agendas.
The other bit of the memo I don't think you got, and I'm sorry to pull you up on this, is you seem to have this commitment to silence in film and to space and to quiet, non-showy long shots in your film. Right. I was sat there just thinking, hang on, this isn't cutting all over the place. I'm not actually used to seeing that. I think the language of the big film that we're seeing has changed quite dramatically as well. So can you talk me through your approach there? Because you're not just swimming against the tide in the way that it got made, but it's also a little bit in the way you made it.
I think because I first came of age in the late 60s and early 70s, and first movie I saw was Sweet Charity, and that's a genius director, Bob Fosse, figuring out about the camera, but overusing the zoom lens, because there was a year, 1967 probably, when the zoom lens was invented, or not invented, but discovered, and it became. And so I've always sort of thought, I don't want to make a movie that's in the style of the time. There are sort of more classical principles behind the way that you approach visualizing a story, and those. So I think if you look, people are always asking, God, it's such an eclectic group of movies. What do they have in common and all that stuff? And of course, I think there's a lot, but I do think cinematically the approach is always a very classical approach. So and especially here, it's the opposite. It's sort of the mirror image of a musical, in that what you learn about musicals is it's all about rhythm, not only rhythm within a song, but the rhythm of when is the up song and then when is the song that's very emotional and all that. And I find here too, as we know from Hitchcock, suspense is all about rhythm too, except for in this case it's about holding back. So I think that's part of it.
Well, I can jump forward about 15 questions to my Hitchcock question off the back of that. But no, in fact, no. The thriller I want to cite actually is one Hugh Jackman made called Prisoners, and I heard a screenwriter dissect that film, and they pointed out that in that film we're finding out information about 2-3 minutes ahead of the characters, which is what kind of kept the pace, and not even the pace, but the narrative, the interest, the tension in there. And I'm assuming when you're doing a thriller, I come this very much from the outside in, that a lot of this is pacing in the edit.
Completely, yes. And let's speak specifically to that point about where you are vis-a-vis the audience, because I think it won't surprise people to know that Helen's probably got more secrets. It's sort of got a kind of more hidden agenda, certainly from the beginning of the story, than Ian does, because Ian enters the movie basically as a con man. And it was very hard to be absolutely certain in shooting how much we wanted to give the audience. I never, well, I will say, I did shoot 3 scenes that were absolutely based on Vertigo. It was absolutely,
Really?
really pursuing that idea that just as you've laid all the mystery clues and you're on pace to have the reveal, you just surprise people by laying it all out in one scene. So we shot that scene with Helen and Russell Tovey and put it in the movie, and I kind of loved the frisson you got from not expecting it and then getting it. However, it then took away the pleasure of the actual reveal later on, which had been the reason I wanted to make the movie in the first place when I read it in the book, this one scene. So then I took it out and realized that was the right way. But to your point, I tried to give myself as many options as possible. It does seem important. I think there are really only 2 rules. You don't want the audience to get way ahead of you. And secondly, you want to play fair with the audience, and you want to give enough clues to what's happening so that when it does come together, they feel that, I might have figured that out.
When it comes to casting a film like this, and obviously the cast is extraordinary. I mean, an enormous amount of the delight I took from the film was just watching these people work. It just felt like a real pleasure. My question to it is that when you're making a thriller, and because I knew nothing about this going in, I mean it was a real delight, and the only thing I knew were the lead 2 actors in it,
right.
And by the stature of those lead 2 actors, I knew that there must be more to both.
That's right.
As a consequence of
That's
that,
right.
and I always minded the great Barry Norman, who used to review films over here. He always talked about The Fugitive. Wouldn't it have been great if that film was inverted? The casting of that film inverted.
Oh my God! Yes, right.
And
yes, right.
Which I just
and
think.
But you're right. The cast is specifically, because we hold off on revealing things about her for longer, the casting of Helen Mirren is the first clue in the movie.
Yes.
Because for a while you are meant to think that she is a gullible widow whose savings are about to be stolen by Ian McKellen, and there's just a great part of you that is sitting there thinking that's not possible. Helen Mirren is smarter than that, right?
But you go into that knowing.
Yes,
at that point.
Exactly.
I mean, there's a version of this film, and I don't particularly want to see it necessarily. that's got 2 unknowns that just completely, blindsides you, where you just wouldn't have anything at all.
Yeah.
But you're comfortable with an audience going in having the first 20% of it.
I think so. I think the pleasure of that is just knowing it, not having it confirmed.
Yeah.
So you're still playing the game. It's with a wink,
Yeah.
But I think that's part of what helps you settle into a movie like this.
And you do still play the game, just for the purpose of anyone listening. We're giving an awful lot less away than you might think from the way that we're discussing it. The one, I mean, just tied to that point, how, on top of how a film like this is marketed, are you? Because you have a trailer out there that talks about this is a twisty thriller.
Yes, very much. And again, they've been great. They've really been partners in this. But yes, there are... you see some early versions that give away that extra bit that you don't want to. There's a whole chunk of the movie that goes into the past that we've sort of kept hidden from the general public so far. And also, I think early on, if you can step back and look at your movie and really, really try to separate yourself from it, something usually becomes clear about its appeal. And I think it's exactly what you're talking about, when you sat down today, which is these actors, right?
Yeah.
So that I was really excited by this idea. I think it's being used more in America than it is here, probably out of incredible deference and respect. But in America, we're treating them as one-name stars. You don't even have to know the first name. It's Mirren McKellen.
Yeah.
It's it's like
it's just Sir and
Hepburn.
Dame.
Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. I think that was the feeling here. It's like it should be Dame Helen and Sir Ian, which is how everyone knows them, right? Which would be amazing, right? Probably more for a comedy, But I love the fact that it's Hepburn Tracy. That a big part of the appeal is seeing these 2 actors have at it in an extremely contemporary. This is not a classic play, but really have at it with these 2 highly juicy roles, but in a movie that is very much of today.
We should mention your supporting cast as
Oh,
well.
yes.
Not least Jim Carter.
Jim Carter, oh my God, he just has that fairy dust twinkle, doesn't he? I mean, and he's playing a baddie here, which I love. But in a way, also the only warm spot in Ian McKellen's character's life. So there is a sense of a real devotion between the two of them.
I don't, as a rule, read press notes just because, again, I try and go in blind. But I'd seen the film, so I read the press note. I do have to take some umbrage there because it says it's best known as Carson the Butler in Downton Abbey, and clearly we're talking Deja Vu in Top Secret. That
right, exactly. Yeah, that's right.
It's not just me, is it?
No, not at all. That's for everybody.
Deja Vu.
That's right. And I think he thinks so too. Yeah,
well,
absolutely.
excellent.
Yes.
People said that to him before.
Oh, absolutely. That is true.
But also, I mean, the biography that's put out of you obviously talks about your many successes, but you've never struck me as shy about your earlier work either. About
no, not at all. No, horror movies. Yes, exactly. Yeah. No, and it's funny because it's become a kind of again familiar question about the genre hopping and things like that. But it's always that's right from the beginning. I was doing that. In cable movies where I first learned how to make movies. They were social dramas and thrillers, and obviously I've never made comedies. Probably, I don't think.
Comedic films.
Comedic films, yes, exactly. But I love, and that for me. I was prepping Bride of Frankenstein, right?
Yeah.
And that I was very excited by the idea of getting back to doing a full-on horror movie, So that's something I hope to get to do at some point, It's a genre I love.
So the rule of asking clickbait questions says that I'm supposed to ask you about all sorts of sequels, about Marvel movies, about Netflix, about superheroes, about stuff like that, and to ask about sequels to other films that you did. So I'm going to go for the last one.
Okay,
if that's
good.
All right. You once told me that FX3 existed as a TV project, that there was talk of that, and that you might have been involved.
Not involved ever with that.
Okay.
No, I'd heard about it, and I was never involved, and it was happening a chunk of time after FX2. I think that was the time. I'm sure I told you this, that I said my nickname was genre killer, because I tended to make the second film in a series that then didn't go on to make. And in fact, I wrote the script for a film that was Remo Williams, The Adventure Begins, and the adventure ended. That was meant to be a character that went on. I rewrote. I'm sorry, I'm not credited on that. I shouldn't say that. Yeah, but FX3. I don't think that ever came to pass.
It didn't come to pass. It's just I hadn't even heard of it until you mentioned it a year or two ago. When you told a story about how you got the clown in your.
Exactly.
Yes. You still got all the
yes, that's great. Yeah. But it's interesting when I think back, just in human terms. Brian Brown's a great. He's a great guy. In addition to being a wonderful actor, but I learned something so essential about show business from him, which was he was heavily involved in making that sequel happen. He'd rejected other scripts. We worked closely together. He's a very smart guy.
Yeah.
He produced movies up to that point in Australia, and he was so invested in it, and it arrives in the world, and it doesn't work. It doesn't work critically. It doesn't work commercially. It is not. Raleigh is not going to be his, James Bond or Indiana Jones, right?
Should have been.
And his response was, "You know what, mate? I'll go down a different path." And he sort of closes up shop in Los Angeles, moves back to Australia, where he has a thriving career, but kind of decides, well, those are the terms I want to do it on. It's not going to happen, and I'm perfectly happy with that. I always thought it was really admirable.
So these were the films. I mean, to call them your formative films.
Yeah, they were.
These were the things that you're taking lessons now that are threading into
exactly
the choices that you're making. Because I read you're doing a musical Christmas Carol next.
Yes, although it's not literally that. It's funny.
Oh, it is. It said it on the internet.
I know it must be true.
It must be true.
It's not a Christmas in that it's the prequel to A Christmas Carol that Dickens never wrote. So it's coming at A Christmas Carol from a new angle. Okay. So it is not and then it intersects with it. The score is written by Stephen Schwartz, and you might say it is what Wicked is to Wizard of Oz. It has the same relationship to Christmas Carol. So I think it's because I read something about someone complaining no one will ever top the Muppets Christmas Carol musical. Yeah. And all I want to say to those people is we're not competing with that because it actually isn't a Christmas Carol musical.
Think if you kind of merge it into that FX sequel, though, you've kind of got an angle that no one's thought of.
Exactly.
There.
It's true.
And then that's
then
two
it's all
bites
there.
really.
Yeah,
I mean, it's just if I can, I've segued all over the place, but I do want to come back to The Good Liar just as we slowly run out of time, because there are some. There's a shot in the film because at first I thought, I wonder if you filmed this chronologically. I looked it up, and clearly you've gone to locations all over the place. Yes. I'd imagine chronology would be ideal, but it's just not an option.
Happening. Although because we built that set in the house, in that house we did it in order.
Yeah. So there's two things then. There's number one, you've got almost an amazing overhead shot. Almost, you have an amazing overhead shot of basically what looks like a gated community, but the gate is just trees. It just looks like a prison itself, really. Yes. Was that what you were trying to get across there?
Absolutely.
Because I just think that's a real widescreen shot.
I love that shot, and I will tell you that if you pull out a little wider, then you reveal that in the middle of these circles, it looks like a Kubrick, like little landscape. There's one house that doesn't fit into the design at all, that stands out, that's hugely lit, much bigger, and it turns out that that's Michael Caine's house. And we only found that out later. But that shot is actually blown up so that you don't see that, and all you just see is the kind of uniformity of the suburb.
The other thing I wanted to touch on then, the second point to that, is that, again, there's a version of this that's theatre, and that you've got two brilliant theatre, but it's cinematic. And I'm curious, how do you, on set as a director, stop this being theatre and make sure it's being cinema? Not that they're completely independent.
No, I hear you. And it's, for one thing, I would say, I'm not sure it's theatre as much as it's because they are deceiving you. Yeah. It is two great actors playing two great actors because they're both very good at it. They're both good at lying, And Helen made the point the other day, actors are the worst liars. In some ways that's true, but there's also some way in which the game of pretend is something that just comes so naturally. But it's a very good question because there does, when things finally are revealed, it's in a scene that goes over with flashbacks around 15 minutes of one person standing and one person sitting in a chair, right? Yeah. And I think it truly, there are no tricks either. There's no, there are 3 or 4 angles. It's not as though you can, the camera's spinning above them or anything like that. But I think at that point, it's really editing and the fact that the performances are so scaled to the camera, right? They're so intimate. Yeah. So I think the intimacy of the actors and the way in which they're giving us the scene, I hope makes it not feel as though there's a fourth wall there.
It's a blunt question as well, but I get a sense that you don't think we're thick as an audience, and I see that quite a lot in the way thrillers pan out and the way thrillers develop. But you seem to assume an innate intelligence in the people watching the film. I hope
so, and I have to say it is. I always say if I were to ever teach movies, give a course, I would. The first and last lecture would be because it's the most important job of the director is that first meeting with a studio after an audience has seen it, because inevitably what you're fighting is this impulse because there's always one person who doesn't understand something, to add explanation, and it is kind of, I think, the bane of contemporary movie making, and it's something I really fight. With these guys I didn't have to, luckily, but on other movies you're always fighting somebody who pipes up with what on that side could be the safest thing to say. It's like, don't you think we should just explain that a little more? And I think it's responsible for more deadening moments in movies, that impulse, than anything else.
And longer movies.
Yes, yeah. But you're right. There is an innate intelligence in the audience, and it's a communal thing too. You can feel everyone sort of, and there's nothing worse than either being over-explained or being ahead of something, right?
And then just one last question, because I don't want to ask you the question about superhero movies and stuff like that, because they make my eyes roll to the nth degree, those questions. Can you recommend me a film or an upcoming filmmaker that we've not heard of? Who we should
Well, that's good. I don't know about upcoming and not heard of, because I've only read about them, and I've been in a bit of a writing cave, so I'm behind. Yeah. So frankly, like, you know, and this is someone who's already celebrated, but well, I would say I just saw The Lighthouse, Robert Eggers movie. Yeah. I don't know if that's arrived here yet.
Shortly, yeah.
Yes, but that is a remarkable and completely original sleight of hand movie with 2 actors and a mermaid, and really just stunning. And along the same lines, Ari Aster's movie Midsummer. You know, again, you're just watching people who younger filmmakers with incredibly distinct voices and just innate cinematic gifts. You know, both of those really thrilled me recently.
Brilliant. Bill Condon, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And with that, our time was up. The Good Liar arrives in UK cinemas on Friday, the 8th of November 2019. I have to say, I had a really good time with the movie. I went in knowing next to nothing about it, and just the sheer joy of seeing Helen Mirren and Ian McKellen playing against each other is just worth the admission price. I do think it's one of those films that, because it's in its own way a lower profile big studio release, it might struggle to get some traction. So I would encourage you to seek it out if you miss having big thrillers of that ilk on the big screen. That's it for me for this episode, though. You can find more from me on Twitter at Simon Brew. You can find the Film Stories Project on Twitter at Film Stories Pod. If you like this podcast, please do subscribe. Please do leave nice reviews. It all makes such a huge difference to independent publishers like me. The new issue of Film Stories magazine has just gone to the printers, just as I've recorded this as well. I'll have more on that in the next episode of the Film Stories podcast, and that will be coming at you at the usual time next week. For now, as always, thank you so much for your support. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll be back soon with another bunch of film stories. Take care. Bye-bye.